Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Sinead Says podcast. The weeks are flying, guys. I am not coping. I am probably doing very much Groundhog Day at the minute because I'm studying and not really doing anything. I'm not drinking. I just training for high rocks, going to the gym, coming back, studying, writing new courses, writing new meditations, all the bits. And you know what? Couldn't be happier. Couldn't be more content. Life update. Oh my God. Sam told me last night that we're going to New York. We're going to Tampa and then we're going to New York because a friend of ours is from Tampa. We're going to go there with them. Then we're going to go to New York on our own for my birthday this year, which we promised each other no big birthdays. Like every birthday, like my first ever birthday with Sam, I was 31. He got me a surprise trip to New Zealand with all my friends. We went skiing. To this day, still the best week of my life. Like I was just like, God, I'm going to marry this man. And then I took him to Fiji for his birthday, and then he took me to Paris, and then I took him to Japan, and now he's taking me. But we said Japan was meant to be the end because that was his 30th birthday, and I was like, right, no more after that. And now I'm like, what, are we going to do this again in November for your birthday? I was like, God, babes, I can't keep up with this. But he was like, no, I promise, like, this is the last one. This is the last one. I was like, all right, okay, this is the last one. Okay, we'll see. But God, can't be complaining. It's also lovely to be with someone who just gets so excited and treats me like that. And just, you know, wait out, girls. Wait out for, like, he honestly was like a wee bunny last night. He was so excited to tell me, even though my birthday's in July, he told me last night, like, because he just was so excited. He could not wait to tell me, and we could plan it together, even though he's going to plan everything himself. But yeah, this week we're going to dive into a little bit of emotional, like mastering your emotions a little bit, because an interesting topic had come up in book club, and I was really astounded by all the answers that everyone said, and I just went away and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I was like, I need to do a podcast on this. I need to do some research. But before we get into it, there will be some serious talk in this podcast. It's about younger years in love. And younger years in love, we have very drastic emotions and drastic feelings, and they can sometimes lead to really horrible thoughts. So we're diving into that today. Before I went in, I did want to mention that we are sponsored by BetterHelp, which is an online therapy platform. If you deal with any sort of emotions or anything like really extreme highs and lows, and you can't really get in control of your emotions, sometimes therapy can be a very, very good avenue to help you understand yourself a little bit more, stop your emotional brain taking over and allowing for different tactics and tools to deal with your emotions. Because when our emotional brain is in charge, basically, a lot of things happen. We shout a little bit more, we say things that we regret, and it's good to have emotions, but we need to also have that computer brain kind of there too, to tell us to stop, to tell us to think about what would happen in the future and think about the repercussions. But therapy is a very good tool for that. So if anybody would like to try therapy, I highly recommend BetterHelp, and it is so affordable, guys. So you can get 10% off your first month with betterhelp.com/Sinead. That is betterhelp.com/Sinead. So we're going to dive right in. So what happened was, in book club, we were reading the book that we were talking about last week, which was Conversations on Love. And if anyone wants to start a book club, this is how I do book clubs. So book clubs, how I do a book club is I put everybody in groups, depending on how many people are there, because I want every single person to speak and have a deep conversation. I usually put people in groups between 5 and 6, right? And I give them prompts that will spark deep conversation and get them talking about things that they wouldn't normally talk about with their friendships, all right? With their normal friendships. So it's like like-minded conversations where every single person gets a chance to talk. So you go around the group and everyone says their weekly win and their weekly struggle. First of all, that's like a given that happens every week. And it's quite nice because, you know, it's nice to hear other people's struggles because it feels like you're not alone. People can actually just open up and be heard, and people's wins, they're celebrated. It's lovely. And then I will ask them questions, right? Based on the things that are on the book. But like, obviously no one even reads the book in book club because they just come for the chats. But a few of us do read it. But anyway, I make up prompts anyway. You don't have to read the book. You just come for the chats. But one of the first prompts for that book was, what was your first experience of love and how it affected you? And it didn't have to be your first relationship or anything. It could have been your parents and your first experience of love. But most people talked about their first real like their first relationship when they were younger. And there was a common theme. And it astounded me because I thought it was just my experience, but it was a common theme. So you may relate to this, you may not, but I'm going to talk about my first experience of love, and in both ways, like maybe, you know, what I thought love was, and, you know, what I experienced. So my first relationship was very intense. Like, emotions were so heightened, so crazy, so toxic, which is quite normal for a first experience of love, because we're navigating our first relationship. We're navigating our first amount of emotions and hormones in our bodies. It's quite normal for your first experience of love to be very drastic and emotional and a lot. Anyway, so mine was very, very drastic. My partner was really jealous. It wasn't really at the beginning. When I think about it, it was more towards the end. There was a lot of jealousy, a lot of like accusing me of things that I had never done. It was just very, very intense, and I've never experienced that ever since. Like, but it was, you know, we were both kids, and, you know, I get it. It was just very intense. My first experience of love was, I was just on for a few years, on and off. Like, I think he cheated a few times. I was so anxious. I would like beg for him back, and then he would do it again. It was like this string of like toxicity. But while I was dealing with for a long period of this relationship, as someone who was the ages between 16 and 18, maybe I was experiencing this, was my partner telling me that he was going to do something to himself if I left him. And I talked about that in the book club, and we all go one by one. And so many girls experience the exact same thing. And even if they hadn't experienced that, and me also experience periods of like attention seeking, like lying to your partner, saying that somebody tried to get with you, because you're not really understanding your emotions. You need something and you want something, and you're not getting your needs met. So you're trying to gain that attention, or also not actually being able to regulate your emotions and experiencing that amount of pain. Now, that experience for a very young girl was, and it's crazy because I didn't even tell anybody. I don't really know. Like, I'm like, why didn't I talk to my mom? Why didn't I talk to anybody? Anyway, so that was me staying in a relationship for a very long time where I didn't want to be in. And I'd actually moved to university at this time. By the time we'd broken up, we hadn't broken up when I went to university, but I thought, you know, maybe I'll get away, and maybe maybe it'll be easier to break up with him that way. And then, you know, he kept showing up, and there was a lot of anxiety for me. Like, there was times I would cry myself to sleep, and my roommate would be like, and I'd be like, oh, what am I meant to do? What am I meant to do? And like, I don't know if I spoke to someone. Like, I spoke to my friends, and like, it's weird because like, I'm like, why didn't I speak to my mom, or why didn't I speak to somebody? I guess that's because there wasn't really an open conversation of like emotions and relationships within the home, which is something that we're going to talk about later, of like how to maybe like deal with this situation better. So it wasn't just me. All the other girls in the group honestly had the same experience of their partners saying something like they were going to do something, or they were somewhere, and it really scared them, and it really scared me. And I went through this for a long time. And having someone's life in your hands when you're like so young, and also with them feeling that way, you didn't know what to do, they didn't know what to do. So you're very, like, it's a very damaging process. When we looked back at it, we both, and then we all talked about how it affected us in the future, and it affected us. Like, it affected me and the other people in the group. There was another girl in the group, and we had very similar experiences, like becoming very avoidant to relationships, like not really wanting to be in a relationship because you didn't want to go down that route again. You didn't want someone to fully depend on you. And that's really what was happening. Like, obviously when we're younger and our first experience of love it's just really codependent. It's like, I don't love myself. I don't know how to self-soothe, and I don't know how to self-validate. So I need you as the person to help me do that person. And that's quite common because we're not really taught what love is. There's no education on love, relationships, how to manage our emotions when we're younger. So we just go by what we're feeling. And then obviously over time we learn things. We learn that, saying that is not going to work. Doing this is not going to work. All right. But that was my experience, and it really damaged me and my future relationships. And also, my first relationship was also like very explosive, very jealous. And then obviously the next few relationships, I realized that I even remember like my partner not being jealous and being like, oh, you don't love me? What do you mean? Because I like put love and jealousy together. I thought like, if you loved me, you'd be really jealous. But obviously that is a different type. Like, that's just more of an anxious attachment. And yeah, like an anxious attachment or codependency. I realized pretty quickly that first experience of a relationship was not exactly a normal relationship, but you know, that is the first one. But what really saddened me was everyone talking about it in the group, everyone talking about how it affected them. And then me just sitting back, honestly, the whole day, I just sat there thinking about it, reading books, researching, thinking, how can we stop this? Because it could go farther. It could damage both parties. That person could actually go through with what they're saying. And how do we fix that? And how do we prevent that from happening? And now, think about all the things that have happened that no one's ever like spoke about. Like, you know, I never really speak about that information or that thing. I just think that was just in my past or whatever. But when we brought up that conversation, like, so many people had experienced similar experiences. And I just thought, God, we need a better system. Like, we need a better system. And look, I always say that I do not know what they're teaching in schools. I do not know what they're teaching. And I don't know who's even listening to my podcast, but it's something that I'm really strongly wanting to talk about, because I'm just like, we need to be better. We need to like let people know more about emotions and what's going to come up, like the expectations of your first relationship. Like, why did no one ever talk to us about that? And it reminds me of a book called Emotional Intelligence. And at the very end, I think, anyway, they have a thing in certain schools in America, and it's called self-science, where they actually learn about their own emotions. They learn about self-regulation, and they learn about all these things. But basically I went down a rabbit hole and was like, how can we prevent this? And like, you know, this is just my own experience, but I don't know who's listening. Is it mums that can help their daughters? Is it like people who are younger? I don't know, but I just want you to know that there is a few reasons why people do why we do this in our teens and our young age. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We're talking about why that happens, and then we can talk about tools to prevent that as well. If every little helps, if you are a mother and you have a daughter and she can open up to you, that's massive. Like, why didn't I open up to my mom? Like, but then that door was never opened. Like, you know, grief or heartbreak, you know, it was always like, you're grand. Like, you didn't want to talk. And even it's weird how much I speak about emotions, how much I want to talk about everything all the time. But even still to this day, like, there is an emotional block of like me pouring emotional words to my parents. Like, sometimes my dad will get drunk and start getting mushy with me, and I'm like, no, I'm allergic, because I'm so not used to that pattern in our relationship, just because that was never an open door. And like, even the feelings that I had on one of my first relationships, being so upset and being so like having such horrible and negative thoughts and just sitting up in my room crying. Like, why didn't my mum open the door and be like, oh, well, how are you? Oh, this happens. And like, you know, I don't know. Obviously I'm up there crying and you don't want to annoy your teenager, but I just think maybe if there was a little bit more talk and check-ins with your teenager or with your friends, you know, how are you? How did that go? Because it can be such a traumatic time, and we can just be so young and so stupid and full of emotion, because obviously when we're younger, I spoke about it last week, is that our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So that's the thing that tells us to stop when our emotional brain is taken over. And usually when we're going through a breakup, when we're that young, the emotion is like, all I want to be is with him, blah, blah, and like all these negative thoughts that could take us to a really dark place. We don't have that part of our brain that's going to be like, no, everything's going to be okay. Pain is temporary. Come on. Like, we have that part of our brain now. We have developed that over time. But like, is there a way that we could just stop that from happening? Basically, it's an important conversation, and I hope it's not too deep, you know, but I do feel like it's necessary. So I want to talk about a few reasons why this happens, why young people, and why we just struggle so much and we have such negative thoughts after a breakup. And like, obviously, because we haven't actually developed emotional regulation skills just yet, and or we haven't had any coping skills, we haven't had the experience in order to learn from it. So that's like a massive thing. And just be really aware, like, if your child or your little cousin or your niece is going through their first heartbreak, like, they need help, they need support, you know. The first love is often the first time someone feels really deeply connected to another human being other than their family. So they feel valued by another person, they feel loved by another person. It's a really big deal in a young person's mind. So when that ends, it can feel like a real big loss of their identity, because you are that person's partner, boyfriend, like that's all your identity, it's all you talked about, all you were for that first period of love in your life. So when that ends, it's like an identity crisis as well. Your brain has not yet been fully developed when you are a teenager, and your impulse control is not actually really that active. It's still developing. Meanwhile, the emotional center of the brain is really highly active, making intense emotions feel all consuming and impossible to escape. So you even remember as a young child, like remember you were left out of your friends' sleepover, like the emotions are so intense and you don't have the emotional regulation skills to be like, oh, actually they only had 2 beds, so she just asked her cousin and her sister. You don't have those rational skills. You just think, I'm left out, it's all about me. Everything feels very personal because you just don't have those rational skills. And then another point is just lack of perspective. They just don't have the life experience of pain to know that pain is temporary. So the first time you're ever in love or you're in a relationship, you obviously feel the worst pain that you've ever experienced in your entire life, but you haven't ever understood that like that pain does go away eventually and you will feel better. Whilst now, you know, if me and Sam broke up, I went through a breakup, I would know that I was going to be okay in the long run because of my life experience. So yeah, and then obviously romantic love as a lifeline for these people. So some people who really, really struggle with heartbreak were people that maybe have struggles at home and they're not getting what they need at home, and then they just get this love from another person and it feels unconditional, amazing, and they get all their needs met. So like, can you imagine how drastically they drop whenever they lose that? But yeah, that's probably a lot of the reasons why it does happen, or, you know, there's probably other reasons as well, but that was kind of just the main reasons that were coming up. But ways that we can actually help and support it. Number one thing is normalizing grief, because grief and pain and loss are inevitable in life. And it's like when we're younger that things like that don't exist. If someone passes away, then we don't talk about them. We're not really taught the skills or the steps to deal with grief or loss or just things not working out. We're just kind of told to cover it up, especially in Ireland. I don't know about now, but when I was growing up, like, you know, grief under the cover. Like if I ask my dad about his mom, he's like, no, I can't. Like he can't talk about it because it brings up too much for him. And it brings up, and that's the same as a lot of people in Ireland. Whilst one of the best things that ever happened to me, not ever happened to me, but one of the best things that someone said to me in my grief, you know, when you tell them that someone passed away. And I remember someone said to me, and it was the first, like everyone always kind of gets really awkward or something. And someone just said to me, oh, can you tell us your favourite memories of them? And I could not wait to tell my favourite memories of my friend, you know? And so to this day, if someone tells me that someone's passed, I'm like, oh, like, I know this is so random, but like, I'd really love to know like a memory that you hold, that you cherish, because their face lights up. They just can't wait to talk about them. They can't wait to like have their life as memorable. So normalizing grief. Like I don't remember anyone telling me about heartbreak, grief, knowing that pain is normal and that we're going to feel it. But also no one ever told me that, you know, the pain is going to pass. There was no information for me. Yeah, so I just think normalizing that grief, talking about it, being really, really open about heartbreak to everybody, and just being really vulnerable and open and like, let's have good conversations that are deep instead of just, you know. It's funny because we talk about grief a lot in Ireland in terms of like, oh, who died today? Like that's really open conversation to have that everyone has. But another one that was massively researched was teaching emotional regulation early. So obviously this is studied a lot. Obviously when I'm doing training and we're looking into the neuroscience of emotional regulation, like, you know, it is completely proven that learning emotional tools and learning things like meditation, mindfulness in our younger years will help us navigate life's hardships, navigate our emotions, navigate through breakups without spiraling. So understanding our emotions. But I know as well there is things like meditation, mindfulness being taught in schools, so that's absolutely amazing. So buzzing with that. But just in general, like learning those skills of what are you feeling in your body? You know, like when we were angry when we were younger, like understanding what anger meant and what hurt meant. Like if you look at, you know, learning about emotions, right? And if you look into like self-science, what I was talking about earlier, self-science is like the study of self, and they do this with some schools. And it's just like you're studying yourself, and it's such an interesting topic to learn. So if you were in school, like I wish in school that I learned about that, because obviously I'm obsessed with all that stuff. And maybe if I learned all that, I would have like did a different degree as well, because obviously I was so interested in it. And like I do understand that maybe teenagers probably don't want to listen to it, but at the same time, you know, it might interest them. So you may as well give them that self-science. You can be like, okay, how does that make you feel? And why does that make you feel like that? You know, if you look at what the main emotion is of hurt usually comes from the feeling of loss. And that can come from and you be hurt because you expected someone to be a certain way or to say a certain thing, and you become very, very hurt because of those expectations you have of that person and how much you depend on them. But when we look, if you ask someone, oh, okay, why are you so hurt? Oh, because I expected them to love me forever. When you look at that expectation and be like, right, okay, is my expectation reality, or is it okay for them to feel a different way? I'm just looking through my emotional, like some of my emotion books, and you know, like even when younger people are frustrated, like even knowing the difference, like do you know the difference between being frustrated, angry and disappointed? Like they're all action signals for something to come forward. So like if you look at frustration in itself, like it comes from just being surrounded by roadblocks in your lives where we are continuously putting effort in but not receiving rewards, and we tend to feel the emotion of frustration. But the emotion frustration can actually be like an action signal for it means that your brain believes that you could be doing better. So you can sort of turn it into a positive, like you're frustrated because you know you can do better in this situation, but you're just not getting it. So you can actually turn it into a positive sign and realize that frustration is your friend and brainstorm new ways to get the result that you want. So obviously that's frustration, but then there's a difference between like frustration and disappointment. Like if you're disappointed, disappointment can be a very destructive emotion. Like if you don't really deal with disappointment quickly, the message disappointment offers you that an expectation you have had or a goal you're going for is probably not going to happen. So it's time to change your expectations to make them more appropriate to the situation and take action to set and achieve a new goal. So obviously there's a lot of different emotions like that we don't actually look into. If you even look at fear, people just be like, in school, you feel afraid to do something. Say, for example, like go on stage, do like school play or whatever. And like a lot of children are like, oh, they're too afraid and they feel fear and they just walk away and they don't want to do it. Okay. But like when you examine fear a little bit more, you can tell them that fear is an action signal as well. So fear is an action signal for you're not prepared enough. So you just need to be a little bit more prepared. So when you're more prepared and you feel like you could go out there at ease, usually, and you're prepared with more information, with more emotional regulation, all these things, then you can face your fears. So even understand, hi, do you know what fear is? Do you know what it actually means when it comes up? Like people don't even know those like the simple action signals of emotions. And like we've spoken about guilt so many times in the podcast. I'm like what guilt means and why we feel guilty. Obviously, you know that if you've listened to any of my podcasts on guilt, you know that guilt is usually coming up because you've broken a high standard of yourself. So in fact, like it's an action signal to be like, okay, I have high standards. I feel guilty for breaking one of my high standards. If you didn't have the feeling of guilt, then you would just keep going by in life doing things that are silly and stupid. Guilt is such a powerful, good emotion to have because it stops you from breaking your boundaries, breaking your rules. Another good emotion that I always say is like inadequacy. So a lot of, even when people are younger, like understanding inadequacy is fucking helped me so much. Like feeling inadequate I could say I feel inadequate, you know, doing this podcast, you know, I am just here speaking about my own experience. Like there's so many things that I don't have. I do feel like I have a lot of information and I feel really educated and really smart, but of course the feeling of inadequacy comes up. But the feeling of inadequacy means it has an action signal. It means that you do not yet have the appropriate information, but you can gain it. You know what I mean? Like if you're feeling inadequate in your work and school or whatever you're doing, like there is an opportunity because you can go and get more information. It is an action signal. That feeling comes up for a reason. I feel inadequate because I'm not feeling confident in what I'm saying. Okay, go and get more information then, Sinead. Do you know what I mean? Like, understanding our emotions at the very basic level are so important. We are still on the point of ways to get help and ways to support young teenagers going through heartbreak or hurt. And one of them that what I spoke about before is creating safe spaces. Whether it's through schools or youth groups or online platforms, young people need non-judgmental spaces where they can talk openly about heartbreak, self-worth and emotions. And that for me is so important. Like, just a safe space. Like, how's your relationships going? Any boyfriends? How did that go? Yeah, I can understand that would be really hard. Why did that feel hard for you? Why did that feel hurtful for you? Like, constantly checking in and creating safe space for our children, for those teenagers, for young people, for our friends, because that will definitely help. Another thing is understanding and challenging love myths is very important. You know, our generation grew up with Disney, Prince Charming, you know, you take the man's name and you live happily ever after, when in fact relationships are not like that. And this, you'll know if you listen to my last podcast, we talk about the different types of love and real love versus like falling in love, and those myths that like falling in love and being in love are just like magical forever and you don't have to work on it, you know? So challenge those love myths, like being fucking honest with our teenagers, being honest and being like, hey, this is what's going to happen in a relationship. Like, giving them education on relationships and love will help them so much and stop them from being so damaged from relationships. So do that. And again, check in culture, check in with your friends. Do you want to talk? You may be like, you don't see yourself. You know, sometimes I think about like me crying in my room and I'm like, did no one know I was so sad? Or like, I wish someone was like, are you okay? What happened? And you could talk about it. And then like your mum could be like, oh no, that happens in relationships and blah, blah, blah. And like you could be able to just not just be on your own talking about it. And another, like one of the last things they were talking about there was creation, and being creative is also going to help, right? So understanding your own strengths and weaknesses and being creative and doing your own thing, right? So when you introduce teenagers into like new hobbies like sports or whatever, you know, creative stuff, like they're creating their own identity. So their identity is not then the other partners, you know, they don't like form like a codependency as much because they have their own life and there's things that they love to do. So that relationship doesn't have to be their whole world. You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't really know what more I can say, because obviously I'm not a clinical psychologist. I have a psychology background, I have education, but I don't really know. I just wanted to talk about that and like other people's experience, my own experience. And like, then I was like, I feel like there has to be some sort of podcast that helps people with this. And if this even reaches one person who has a teenager, and yeah, just checking in with them. I'm trying to think of a few questions that you could ask them. Oh, is there anything you need today? Or, cause I know like they do feel like teenagers are allergic to their mom and dad, aren't they? Like, we're just like, nah, we can't be dealing with you. But like, maybe if the conversation was a wee bit open, but not really cringy, you know, if anyone has any suggestions on how that would be, I don't know what I would say. But I think always being open from like when you're younger up until now would be really important, because, you know, if my mum started like opening up to me, you know, the way I was saying, I was like, God, I'd be a wee bit allergic whenever they like get a bit mushy to me, even though I'm mushy to every single person, because obviously I'm not used to it. It's not our usual chat. But yeah, that was what I wanted to bring up this week. Spotify have comments now, so I'd really like to know what your experience of first love was, how it affected you, you know, because even those first experience of love for me, like they really affected me. Like I didn't want to be with someone for ages. I was like, I can't deal with that. It seems really, really difficult. And anyway, obviously I never told you the finish of it, but anyway, you know, after a few years of that happening, I did reach out to an older person and they helped. And yeah, got both parties help, and yeah, we healed and moved on. But after a few years of going through all that stuff, I do feel like it could have been done a wee bit sooner, if only maybe I reached out to someone as well, or had the emotional awareness of what was actually happening to me and to them, and steps to help them, I guess. Yeah. Oh, I need to do the quote of the week. I don't even, oh wait, I'll just pull out a quote from one of these books actually. So the 2 books that I would talk about if you want to know more about emotional awareness. So Emotional Intelligence over here is by Daniel Goleman. Now, I was just looking over this before I started this podcast and I was like, God, I want to read this all over again because I can't remember anything. Okay, I'm just going to read out like one little passage that I've highlighted. So I must have read this in 2020 or 2021 because that wee thing's from Dublin. Yeah, I think I remember reading this in Dublin. So when fear triggers the emotional brain, part of the resulting anxieties fixates attention on the threat at hand, forcing the mind to obsess about how to handle it and ignore anything else for the time being. Okay, so worry is in a sense a rehearsal of what might go wrong and how to deal with it. The task of worrying is to come up with positive solutions for life's problems by anticipating dangers before they arise. So that is the purpose of worry, which is really quite important, that we become chronic worriers, but really worry is just a natural thing that the brain does in order to rehearse what's going to happen, in order to prepare you for dangers before they arise. But then it did say the difficulty with chronic repetitive worries is that cycle keeps going on and never gets any nearer to a positive solution. And that is why, emotional hijacking comes in the way, and that's why people end up being chronic worriers. But knowing that worry is kind of like an action signal and a natural thing to do for the brain, and knowing that it's designed to be there to rehearse what you're going to do in the face of danger. And then once you've done that and you've prepared yourself, you can move away from that instead of just keep spiraling. Okay, guys, I'm going to leave it there today. We have covered a lot: early relationships, emotional intensity, why love can feel so overwhelming, and how lack of emotional education can set us up for some heavy experiences. The biggest takeaway here is emotional regulation isn't something we magically know, and it's something that we learn. And it's never too late to start. So if you're supporting a teenager or you're in the middle of this yourself, just please make sure to reach out to your loved ones and get some support. And if this podcast touched you in any way, or you found something really interesting in it, we would love to hear from you, because now we have Spotify comments. So just drop us a comment, tell us what you thought about the podcast. Let me know if you'd like to know more about this topic. And yeah. And again, thank you so much for tuning in to the Sinead Says podcast.